duties.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sit
great.
over there. I told you he's a director.
Great. So you were talking about the women staying behind during the war.
During the war, women went to work, and after the war, they didn't want to stop working because for the first time we had a little more freedom and we were able to have the paycheck. And so a lot of the men who came back did not go back to work right away. They wanted to rest, they wanted to do, and women took advantage of that. And I took advantage of that also, without knowing it. I didn't deliberately doing that. But I was a woman alone, and I always had to work to support myself. And so after the war, when I had this job as a script clerk, and I went into the cutting room, there was room for a woman to get work as an editor. At that time, there were 3 editors in New York, 3 women editors, and I would be the 4th. New York is a big place and has a big film production in New York. So I went to work in the cutting room after I was a script clerk, and I loved the cutting room. It was quiet, it was private, and you could do magic, absolute magic. And I had to learn because I'd never touched film before. And so I went into the room to rewind 1,000 feet of 35mm film. And I saw what the editor had done. And she went, and the whole thing went. So I went, and the whole 1,000 feet went off and curled onto the floor. And I stood there and I said, my God, it has a life of its own. What am I going to do now? I'm finished. But I said, well, I'll have to get it back on the reel. So quietly, it took me half a day to get the stuff back up on the reel. Luckily, everybody was busy and didn't notice I was in a little room. And I thought, I'm going to conquer that. And I did. I became a good apprentice.
Now, I want to be clear. This is on your brother's?
And my brother's film.
Yeah. And this was your first? Ever?
Ever. And he wasn't going to fire me because I was working for nothing. I was working for the knowledge, you know. I went in there.
And this was, he shot on 35mm.
Oh, yes. Yes. We didn't have professional 16mm then. Everything was 35.
Describe working with that kind of film and what it felt like and what it smelled like, and describe the editing rooms there.
At that time? At that time, we had the black moviolas. They had a little tiny screen on it, and it clattered and it made a tremendous noise. And we worked with optical film, the optical track. That was before tape.
Describe that. And what's a moviola?
A moviola is an editing machine that you can see film and listen to the sound that goes with the film. And you can open the viewing thing, and you can make marks. You say, cut here, do that, you know, and then you take it on a synchronizer. These are all tools of the trade, you know, and you put the scenes together according to the script that I had botched up all the way.
Really?
I didn't really botch it up all the way, only a little bit.
So on your brother's movie, what's the name of the movie?
It was called The Fight Never Ends, and it was with Joe Louis, a very sweet man. And since he knew that I was the script clerk, and I was always bothering everybody, you know, saying, what are you wearing? What scene is it in? You know, let me see, let me see. One day he came in and he said, look, I changed my socks. And he made me feel good, you know, made me feel good.
So he was cast as a dramatic actor.
Yes, he was cast as himself to influence, you know, little boys, little girls, you know, kids to be good, to be smart, to go to school.
So this movie was for a specific audience?
This movie was called, it was a black film. It was made only for a Negro audience, at that time called Negroes. And at that time, they did quite a few of them, you know, with black actors in black areas, and there were quite a few. Now they belong in the archives. And once in a while, if you do a thing on jazz, you come out with all the old singers that nobody ever saw except a black audience.
How did your brother come about directing a film like that?
He wanted to direct and was the only one available, so he did.
And how was it financed?
I don't know how it was financed. All I know is I got paid very little. But I had car fare and lunch, that was enough, and rent, paid the rent.
So now that you are a successful editor apprentice, what did you do after that?
I went looking for work. And there's no ads, you can't find. So I went to all the laboratories because I knew there were cutting rooms there. And I knocked at one door to another and I got another job.
What was that?
It was a Betty Crocker cooking show.
On television?
It was on television. And it was a dramatic show, of which I knew a lot of dramatics. And the beginning was always the same. The husband and wife would have a little fight, and he'd go slamming out the door. And then she said, "Oh, I am now going to cook cream puffs, because when he comes home, he is going to love that and forgive me." And so we went into how to make cream puffs. And then he'd come home and he'd say, "Oh, darling, these are the best cream puffs I have ever eaten. Our marriage is now secure." And every week we did another one. And I thought I couldn't stand it. But, you know, I was getting a salary.
Now, what network was this? I mean, were you working for a production company or a
Production
network?
company.
So they were supplying that to...
To networks. It was, I don't know, we didn't have networks, really. There was no ABC then.
Was it NBC or CBS?
Yeah. But I don't remember any networks, really. And we had, what was the name of that thing in New Jersey? I don't remember.
When was the first time you saw television?
In 1948, 49, somewhere in there. 48, I think. A friend of mine and I made a little TV set out of a kit.
You made a TV set?
Yeah, we followed the directions. And then it didn't work, and then we took it up to New Rochelle or something where the kit came from, and they said, "Oh, yes, you need this instead of that." And they did it, and it worked.
Now, why would you make a television set?
Because we couldn't afford to buy one. And it only cost $60.
I mean, had you seen television before that?
No, but I had made walkie-talkies during the war. So those wiring didn't scare me. Resistors and condensers and tubes didn't frighten me at all.
You hadn't seen a television in a department store? I mean, had you just heard about television?
No, I had seen it walking past the stores, but I'd never really sat down and looked at one. And I thought that was it was an occupation.
What did you think when you first saw an image of a television?
It was only a 5-inch screen, but it was remarkable. There was this great big woman around 11 o'clock at night. I don't remember the name of that show. It is an old show. And she was blonde, I think, and always wore glittering clothes. Big woman, and she would sing and dance. And we would look at it and say, "Look at that, look at that." Yeah.
Wow.
But then with Betty Crocker, I used to bring a coffee in a thermos. And I'd go out in the hall and drink a coffee and smoke a cigarette. You could not smoke in those days in the cutting rooms because the film was all nitrate and we would explode. People have died. Fires are horrible. So no spark and no cigarette. So you'd go in the hallway and look up and down, make sure no fireman was there, and you'd smoke and drink a cup of coffee. And across the hall in another cutting room was another editor, a very small man, and his name was Gene Milford. And I didn't know who he was, but I gave him coffee because I liked him. And we'd stand in the hallway and talk and drink coffee. And one day he said, I'm taking you to lunch. And I said, okay. And he bought me, he said, we'll have 2 champagne cocktails. And I had heard there was a man, if he wanted you to work for him, he would order you a champagne cocktail. And I said to him, Gene, are you offering me something? And he said, yes. Have you ever heard of Edward R. Murrow? And I said, never. Who is he? He says, well, he says, I'm going to do a pilot for them. I said, a pilot? He says, yes, and I'd like you to come over. It's a 6-week job, good job. You get paid well, and you organize the cutting room, and we'll do this 6-week job, a pilot. I said, sure.
Now, you were, at this point, still an apprentice, or did you move up to an assistant?
I was an assistant then.
Assistant editor.
Yeah, but I would put the show into first cut.
Which at that point was common, right?
At that point you were supposed to. But that is editing. And I didn't know it was editing until I went to work for See It Now.
How did you even start to, if you never really edited, how could you put a show together?
Well, this was scripted, and I watched. I watched all the time. I watched what the editor was doing. And that's how I learned. And when they would go out for lunch, I would sit there and make a couple of cuts. And they would accept it. They'd say that was pretty good. But you have to be very bold and very brave to do that. When you cut soundtrack, then it would make you had an optical eye that went over the cut, and it would go. So you had to cut bloops for it, you know. In other words, a black, like wings, and you'd cover the cut with that so that the eye would ride over it.
Now this is before tape, right?
Oh yeah.
So you have to glue.
Yeah.
So and let's get really technical for a second.
You
Describe making an edit with this film. How exactly would you go about making an edit?
You look at it, you make a mark, and where the mark is, you cut. But every time you cut, you'd lose a frame. And every time you cut the track, you had to make sure you cut it exactly in the right thing. And this is optical track, and you can see it. So you make a mark, and you can see, like the S is very long. So you'd mark it, and you'd look at it, and you say, right there.
So the optical track was separate from the picture track?
Oh yeah, double system.
So you have to make two cuts per edit.
Or not. You can make 5 cuts of film before you make one soundtrack.
Yeah. And how would you put 2 pieces of film together?
With a splicer. And you'd scrape the emulsion off with a razor blade, and then you put a little glue on it, and you slap down the other side. You press a little bit, wipe it off good, and there was your splice.
Now describe why nitrate was so dangerous.
It was made of silver nitrate, and that is explosive. And until safety film came in, this was a dangerous place to be.
So at that point, nitrate film was the only film available.
At that point, nitrate film was the only film available, and the size we ever had was 35 millimeter. There were no other film. Maybe there was 16 for home use, but it was not possible to cut it. First time I cut 16, I couldn't project it. It slipped through because we didn't know how to make the splices. And it was a war in India against Pakistan somewhere or something or other. And I had to swear the cuts were good. Went on the air fine. Could never see it.
Now, had you, either with the Betty Crocker show or other production happening in New York, had you gone to a TV studio?
Never.
Never?
Never. When Gene Milford said, we work on a pilot, I thought it was a airplane pilot. I thought we were going to do a thing on planes or on ships. I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And then I came in and they said, this is a pilot on Wurshba. I thought, what is a Wurshba? It is something I don't know. Turned out to be a lovely, wonderful man. That he was making a test on camera, see if he was all right.
And what's his full name?
Joe Wurshba. We always called him Joe. Yeah.
Now, so I just want to make sure that I understand. You started out as an apprentice. You became an assistant editor.
Yes.
And now, were you part of the union?
Yeah.
Was there a union?
There was a union.
What union was that?
It was Local 771 of IATSE. I don't know, international, all that stuff, IATSE.
Now, how did you get into that?
They chased me down the hall. I didn't know whether I was going to stay in film, and I didn't have money for the initiation fee. And the business agent chased me down the hall, caught me, and said, you have got to join the union. And finally I said, okay. And I was glad I did.
Had you met the other 3 women editors?
No, I met them at the first meeting.
How was that?
Well, we went to a meeting, and there was Mavis Small, she is now, and Dina Levitt. She was married to a writer. And Laura Hayes. She was related to President Hayes. These were the 3. And I was the 4th.
How'd that make you feel?
It was about time there were 4. I always felt that we needed more women for some reason. The men were kind of rough. They were very macho. They thought they were really good. And we were just as good as they were.
Now, you said you earlier that you hadn't heard of Murrow. Did you not hear Murrow on the radio as the war was going on?
No, never.
And did you hear it now?
Never.
So you weren't listening to radio as much as a...
No.
So then...
I was listening to music. I didn't listen to the news. I didn't care. Didn't read a newspaper for a long, long time. But they changed me. We changed them, and they changed me.
Well, let's talk about that. So Gene invited you to work on this pilot.
Yeah.
You learned that it wasn't a ship or a plane.
That's right.
Tell me when you the first day that you came to work for.
Well, I forgot. I could not go to work there at the beginning. I had to go a week late. I had to give notice. You know, it's not nice to suddenly say goodbye and leave. So I gave a week's notice, and I came in, and the floor was full of film, and there was Gene. Gene had a nervous thing. He jerked. I don't know what it was, but he hit the frame every time. I mean, he was a wonderful editor. He had won an Academy Award with Lost Horizons. So he was there throwing film all over the place. There was another guy there throwing film all over the place. And in the corner, way in the corner, was Mimi. I knew Mimi. I don't remember her last name. And she was saying to me, she says, get out of here while you're still alive. Everyone is crazy here. They don't know what they're doing. They're all nuts. There's this giant of a man called Fred Friendly. Stay out of his way. He'll kill you. All he does is yell and carry on. And I thought to myself, what did I get myself in for? But what I did was I told Gene and Bill Thompson at that time, I said, I am the new assistant.
Now, who was Bill Thompson?
Editor from California, from Hollywood.
Motion picture background?
Yeah. And so we were working on the first documentary ever made for television. So we all came from theatrical productions. But I went in and I said, I am going to sit outside. And I said, in 15 minutes I come in and anything on the floor I throw in the wet barrel. Because there was no way. And they said, "You're not serious." And I said, "Yes." I said, "But you're the assistant." I said, "Yes. But I have to organize this room."
So you were hired by Gene to come in and
organize the room and be the assistant for the 2 editors and everything else.
On this pilot called
Pilot for See It Now.
See It Now.
Yeah. I think we followed some blood. It was during Korea. And we followed. Somebody gave a donation of blood for the armed forces, and we followed that container of blood until it went into the arm of a soldier. That was Murrow's wonderful idea.
Wow.
Bring the war, bring every soldier personally into the audience.
But that wasn't the first broadcast.
I think that was.
The one that I have in the research here is showing, and I'm not sure if that's part of it, but showing the West Coast and the East Coast at the same time.
Oh yes, that was the first. But the first show that we did on film was that East Coast, West Coast. That was the first show.
Did you watch that show?
Sure, I did.
What did you think of this technology of seeing both coasts at the same time?
It was only magic. That's all. There was nothing much. It was magic. And I thought Murrow was absolutely great in that. He had the presence, he had the look. And Fred Friendly was sitting on the floor, poking him with a pencil. Talk now, quiet now.
So, describe the first time you met Murrow. What your first impressions?
My first impression of Murrow? I thought he was a handsome man. I thought he had a lot of presence. And I thought he was smart. But he sure didn't know how to look at film. He always kept his head down in the screening room. And I went over to him and I said, "You gotta look. This is television, you gotta look." He says, "Oh yes, Miss Millie." He called me Miss Millie. And they looked down again. He just loved the spoken word. And we had to always poke him a little, look up, look up. But he was very proud of us.
Now why is that?
He was a man of words. Man of words. And the film was new to both of them, Fred Friendly and Ed Murrow. I don't think they ever went to the movies. It's lucky they had Palmer Williams, who was our production manager. Because when Fred went crazy, Palmer was there saying, "Quiet, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's all right. It's okay."
So describe the first time you met your impressions of Fred Friendly.
Fred Friendly looked at me as if, "What are you doing here? You're nothing but a thing." He was really something else. He looked, I mean, he was only 6'3", and I'm not near that height at all. And he looked right over me and he says, "Oh," and he didn't want to talk to me. So I didn't talk to him until I told him. I said, as soon as I organized the cutting room and everything was smooth and everybody was doing what we were supposed to be doing, and we went into screen film and I took all the notes, and I told him, I said, in 6 weeks, when the show sold, I mean, they loved it and we organized. I mean, we were hired for another year. So I told him, now I'm an editor. And he said, "No way, I'm not going to have a woman editor." And Jean Milford, who was just about my size but very thin, stood in front of me in front of Fred and threatened him with his finger. He said, "She is an editor and you give her a chance. You promised and you will do it." And he said, "Okay." So I cut. And when I screened, we had a screening room. Before the lights came on again, Jean said, "That's the best piece of work I have seen in months." And so Fred couldn't say anything, and I became an editor.
Now, I want to make sure that you were hired by CBS?
No. See It Now was an outside organization. It It was something, I don't know how it was organized or why, but News of the Day, I think it was, Movietone News, Hearst Movietone, right? Hearst Movietone supplied the camera crew. And Palmer was working in the building at that time. And so he was hired as production manager because somebody told Fred that they needed a production manager. Then Palmer told him that he needed editors. And it would be better not to use the News of the Day editors because he wanted a classy type look.
We have kids in the background.